Thanks, everyone. Hello, hello. This is David Haley, CEO of Countalytics. Thank you again for joining Count It Up. It's our new podcast where we talk about the very interesting and crazy world of inventory and how it relates to business, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And today on our podcast, we have Kiko Harvey, who is the Inspector General of the United Nations World Food Program. Hi, Kiko. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, David?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you again. Good to see you again. There's full transparency. Kiko and I used to work together way back in the day at Delta Airlines, and now we've both moved on to bigger and not necessarily better, or bigger and better things, right? You always got to be progressing, always progressing.
That's right.
So Kiko, we're going to just start a little bit tell me about yourself. I know you're from California, raised in California and went to USC. So tell me about you, yourself, your family. How'd you end up at USC?
Well, my dad worked at USC, so it was a foregone conclusion that I would go there because that was where the tuition was not going to cost any money. So I went there. My dad worked there. For the first year, I commuted into USC with my dad. Quickly realized that was not going to be fun, and then I moved on to campus, joined a sorority, did that, the stuff you do when you're in college, and studied accounting. Don't know kind of why I studied accounting. I took a bookkeeping class in high school. I liked it, and I became an accountant. And graduated and went, did the typical big, at that time, dating myself, big 8. But I went to work for Price Waterhouse before it was PwC, and stayed there for a long time. And I had mostly manufacturing clients and mostly factories and those types of manufacturing and a lot of healthcare manufacturing. So at that time, Baxter was one of my clients, and they make a lot of hospital supplies.
Okay.
And so did that. And then my career took me up to Taco Bell and then on to other places, Starbucks and Delta. And now the World Food Program.
All right, so how'd you...
Food. Kind of food in there. There's a food in every single one of those places I've been at. You might...
That's true. That's true. So as again, we met at Delta, but before you were at Delta, you were at Starbucks, and you I think you started their audit group, and you were the vice president of their audit. Tell me about that experience a little bit. And I know we're talking a little bit about inventory, but can you tell me about your experience in Starbucks? I'm sure you saw the growth and kind of your inventory, the key things that you saw as Starbucks grew. I'm sure from probably a couple stores to probably hundreds and thousands of stores, right?
Well, I think there were 1,200 stores, and they had already started in Japan. So that was, so they were, it was a couple years after maybe 2 or 3 years after they'd gone public. So I missed the IPO. Oh, well.
Okay.
But they were, at the time I left, they were opening, or right before I left, they were probably opening about 3 stores a day. So it was on a huge growth spurt. And most of their stores are company operated, and at least in the United States, unless they're licensed or sitting, in the captive, like inside of a grocery store or something, those are licensed. But the freestanding stores are their own, and it helps them to, keep the quality control up. And it's a really interesting business. Speaking of like inventory, their biggest cost item when I was there was not the coffee, although coffee was costly. Their biggest cost was in dairy, as you can imagine. So they use a lot of milk. And if you think about the most valuable item that they have are their gallons or half gallons of milk. And so there was always a struggle of whether it was worth the labor to count the milk and do full inventories of it or not. And so I think when I was there, it was more of an or not. And so they would kind of, the milk deliverers would come in the middle of the night, and they would just stock the refrigerator up to the hilt. So, it was more of so they were a bit on the honor system with their dairy providers because they didn't really know how much they were going to get.
Okay, can we stop there and ask a question? So if you're saying that it was kind of a question about whether we should count it or not, like how did they say, hey, we have so much, even though it's a big dollar item, but you still have to come back and to say, okay, is it really worth counting? Is it worth taking time away from customers? Because it's such a manual process, right?
Well, even if they did it at store close and store opening, store opening, it was always going to be full. But if they did it at store close and then they figured out how much they would need to have delivered, and keep in mind, it's in refrigerators, not just in the front of the store necessarily. They're all over the place. But the labor, the extra labor to have people count it, probably on a cost benefit basis didn't make sense. Now, this was, again, my time there was maybe almost 15, 20 years ago. So
right.
Things may have changed by now. But at that time, that was always the big question as to whether or not it made sense, whether they could afford to count and spend the labor. And so, because there was no fast way of doing it. And so, I think essentially you were on the honor system. You got the invoices from the dairy. As long as they were honest, they would tell you how much they delivered to each store. You would pay that invoice, and then, you'd move on. But what if, and not to say this of any of their vendors, because their vendors obviously wouldn't want to lose the business, but what if they weren't honest? What if for every store they delivered, they put 3 extra gallons of milk, or 5 or 20? How would they know? And so this was one of the, the arguments of whether or not it was worth it to count.
Yep. You know what? That's the funny, because we see the same thing. People always want to know, one, they don't realize how much they're losing potentially, right?
Yeah.
And the honor system only works if you always dealing with honorable people.
Right.
A lot of times we're not always dealing with honorable people. I think one things we see at Countalytics is there is such an inventory across the board, almost, especially retail, right? Mm-hmm. That's where your money is. Yep. And so you have to have a strong accounting system around that. And what a lot of companies have come to us and says, if you can have a simple process, because I think you're dealing with a certain workforce. At Starbucks, they're probably not all in high school, but you're dealing with a certain labor force.
High school. Yeah, right? Yeah,
young people that job might not be their total livelihood or their long term, their passion, right? Yep. And so how can you implement a very easy system that allowed them to do something that's almost like using a regular application? And I think that's what Countalytics does. So how'd you transition from Starbucks to Delta, where we originally met?
Well, it was one of those, I think I left in 2000, at the end of 2000 or early 2009. So 2008, remember, there was the flash crash, and everything just went down. And it was just a little bit depressing, I think. All the retail areas, Starbucks and another place, because it was an affordable luxury, they took a pretty big sales hit. They had grown very rapidly, and so there were a couple Starbucks that were across the street from each other. There were a couple, so they needed to prune and really do a good process. So they started to close some of the stores, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was a happy place at that time. So I got the phone call that you get, on one of those days that isn't your best day, and it was from a recruiter, and they said, are you interested in this great opportunity? And it was an airline. And I thought, I had been in food for a long time. I had some food clients. I had a frozen food manufacturing client when I was at Price Waterhouse. I went to Taco Bell and worked there. And obviously that's in the food industry. Starbucks had been, and I kind of thought, maybe I want to do something a little bit different than food. And so I went into the airline industry, and they had done a merger with Northwest Airlines. And so I was able to start the internal audit function internally. It had been outsourced for 10 years. And so I brought that in-house. And again, there's an element of food in an airline. Right. So I'm not, and now I'm at the World Food Program. So I'm just not going to get away from that.
Well,
But and so that took me to Starbucks, and that's where you and I met. I hired you, and one of my best hires, by the way.
oh,
And you did that inventory or that audit on the beverage.
onboard food. Yep.
Onboard, I think it was an alcohol, actually, onboard alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
which was a not really a high ticket item when you look at the individual bottles, but if you look at the volume and then the number of customers, I think they at that time were one of the largest airlines, still are. And of course, what was complicated there is they gave some of their liquor away gratis, right? So they didn't
Right.
charge for it, and some of it was sold. And so again, the same question: is the labor, now the labor is a whole different formula in an airline than it was, at
Exactly.
Starbucks. And so, does it make sense to count the beverages, whether they're liquor or snacks or canned sodas or mixers or
Exactly.
anything? Does it make sense to make those inventory counts when you're paying so much in labor? So that was another thing. And
question.
I think we actually
Yep.
asked that in one of our audit reports.
I think we did, but I think the biggest question was what we realized is it's not just a one airline problem, right?
Right.
I think it's an industry problem. It's an industry-wide. Most airlines do the same type deal. They have 3 or 4 or 5 caterers, large caterers in the world. And so if they all use those caterers, majority of the time they have those same processes, right?
Yeah. And then you've got something that is not a controlled substance from a standpoint of, but it's obviously something that has some value to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time when we were there was a very large sting operation that was done against one of the large catering companies, not the company itself, but some of their employees had been less than honest, and they had taken, I think it was millions of dollars.
Yep, it was JFK. The companies were they had put all the liquor in trash bags at JFK, and they would throw it over the gate.
That's
and
right.
Then down the street there was a bar that only sold miniature bottles. It was in the Times. It was an article in the New York Times.
In the paper. I remember us reading about it. Right. and putting that in our risk assessment, right, for our audit plan, thinking can that happen here? And of course I think that was a different airline that was targeted in it, but but that issue can happen to anyone.
Yep.
And it can happen. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It doesn't have to be small bottles. It could be anything.
Exactly.
And it's not always, in going back to the Starbucks, kind of example with the milk, it's not always dishonesty. It's just error. I mean, if you're thinking about how quickly those dairy service providers were moving and how many stores they had to get to in a compact period of time, because the stores are open pretty late and they open very early.
Right.
They're rushing, right? They're moving really, really quickly, and they can make mistakes.
Yep.
Both in their favor and not in their favor. And so it's not always fraud. It's just good cost management to know whether or not you've got the right amount of product. It's one of your largest costs next to labor.
Exactly.
And cups, by the way, cups are very expensive. Cups are cups they want to count too, because cups are extremely expensive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that you give a really good point that it's not always fraud. It's not always dishonesty. Sometimes it's just, I meant to hit a 2 and I hit a 3 by mistake, right? And
absolutely. Or you forget to write it down, or you forget to put it, scan it, or whatever, however their inventory systems are working. And then you enter it manually and you enter it wrong, or you don't enter it at all. So yeah.
That's what some of our, we've talked to a couple retail customers, and what they say is, you can't, once you take a picture of something, and for those who don't know, Countalytics, what we do is we're an inventory management company. We take pictures of inventory, and our computer vision and machine learning count the items inside the image. So it leaves a lot less room for error, right? And so you don't have to write down each individual item. That one picture is what does the inventory for you, and it's a lot quicker, saves a lot more money, gives a lot better forecasting. So I do agree with you. I believe all in all, people are good, but we do make mistakes. We're still people, right?
Right. And it's perfect for, if you're talking big ticket items where there's a scanner and a barcode and an inventory system and all, that's easier because it's scanned when it comes in, it's scanned when it goes in the store, it's scanned when you sell it. All of those types of things are helpful. But when you're talking little items with value in bulk, but not necessarily individual value, you really do have the question, is it worth it? Right. And the answer is nobody's even, a lot of places, they try to do a cost benefit analysis, but they do it without ever having really seen what the cost would be. And when inventory is being counted, people are more careful. And so there is less loss. So that you don't get the loss part in a pilot program necessarily to see whether or not it was worth it, because those test programs usually come out pretty well. Very little loss because everybody's aware that it's being counted. And so, so then your math doesn't work as to whether or not it's worth it to count or not. And because you don't ever necessarily see the losses.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you think about your large U.S. airlines, your Uniteds, Americans, Deltas, they all have over 3 million flights a year, right? And so even if you count, we always give the example of one Bacardi bottle might cost $1, right? But if it might cost $1, and then if you think about those liquor trays, there can be 5 to 10 of those liquor trays on each plane. So if one bottle is missing on each one of those trays, that's 10, multiply that times 3 million flights a year, it can be, one bottle can be a 30, 40, $50 million problem very, very easily, right? And so it doesn't take long for the numbers to add up, not in your favor.
Right, exactly. And I mean, airlines even take the weight of, remember, whenever they were trying to change a product or something like that, it was based on would it weigh more, because then they use a little bit more fuel. And if you start thinking that one through, if it's worth it for them to figure out ounces, I'm sure that bottles even at $1 are worth it. But there's more, even in an airline example, staying with that example, there's more than just the liquor, the liquor trays or the snack trays. There's more than what's on the plane. I mean, if you think about, remember the spare parts? Oh my goodness. High value, small, little tiny O-rings or whatever they would be, nuts and screws and bolts you could usually weigh, but there was a need to know where all of your inventory was, so that you could put it on the plane when you needed it, but they're not all engines. There's a lot of things that are just not engines. Right. And those were some of the more difficult inventories, I think, for them to track and keep track of. And if you look even at what I do today, so just to give for people on the podcast, most people don't know what the World Food Program is. It is the largest humanitarian organization in the world, and people have never heard of it. So unless you happen to be following NGOs or following the UN or something like that, you probably don't know what we do. Well, we serve all the starving people in the world. So the 80, 90, well, there's like 300 million, but the most critical people is in the countries that are the most, either they're having conflict or they're devastated by drought or emergency or whatever it happens to be. We're in those developing countries. And what we do is we hire the companies that you've heard of, like the Red Cross, the, Save the Children, Oxfam, all of those large NGOs. We hire them to distribute and work with us as implementing partners to help get the food to the people, because otherwise we'd have an army. And we do the logistics part of that. So we buy and source in a lot of times the food is very generously donated to us in kind from nations like the United States. But we take that food and we distribute it to people, and we also distribute cash. And so we're doing a lot of, so it's a very rewarding, obviously a rewarding job for me personally, especially toward the end of my working career. But all those bags of sorghum and rice and and everything, the pulses that we give, and the high protein peanut butter sleeves that they're kind of, it's extremely highly nutritious, like a paste for children who are extremely malnourished, and all of the cereals and all that has to make it from from shipping dock to warehouse to distribution site, where each volume gets smaller, and you're going through places where the transporters are these are developing countries, and you don't have DHL or FedEx in these, you don't have roads, and so and it's of high value because people are starving, and so there's a high risk of loss. So it's very important for us to count and track the inventory all the way through the process, through barcodes and those types of things. But we also push that responsibility a lot of times onto our NGOs and others. And so that becomes a big process for us as well. So something and now with COVID-19, and you're doing everything remotely. I mean, can you imagine I was on a call the other day that had a number of different industries on it, people in the audit profession, and they were talking about, how do you do inventory when you can't go in the warehouse?
Or you can't touch something. You can't touch it. Right.
And they've got, they basically have to have a camera and sit high on a perch, and then they're using drones, and they're, it's a very difficult process to manage right now.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and we see it a lot. Just in the several conversations we have. Obviously, we're a relatively new company, but we get all types of questions about, how can I count this, especially now with COVID-19. Yeah. We're talking to a lot of hospitals now about how do we manage we're talking to Duke Hospital, actually, about to start a project with them about how do we manage all these donations that we're receiving. People are coming in and giving us PPE, and we don't know how much we have, we don't know how much we're using, and how do we account for it? And so I think that's a very valid point, especially when you need to be clean and sanitary, and you don't want somebody licking their thumb and touching the piece of paper.
No.
To count the items. But that's a real issue. And so we see it. I think inventory, sometimes people don't correlate how important inventory is to business, right? It intertwines with so many types of businesses. And with the balance sheet, with laying on the balance sheet, you have to make sure you account for it appropriately, and that's what we try to do. But your job sounds so fascinating.
It is, and I've gone to some places I never thought I'd be. I've been to the border of Somalia and Kenya. Never thought I'd be there, and I've been to Juba, South Sudan. And I've been to Ethiopia several times, and Uganda, and places really there is nothing more touching than going to a protection of civilians, or a POC camp, and seeing people who they're living in essentially. They're not even huts. They're just pieces of sheet metal that have, some sort of a sheet or something on top to protect them from the sun, essentially. And of course, as the rains come, that all, becomes a troubling mess. But, and they're living this way because they're somehow, this tribe or this group is not accepted necessarily into the environment that they're in. Usually they're refugees coming from a different country, and getting some protection from the UN. But it is so heartwarming to see these small children who are smiling and happy. And you're looking around going, how can you be happy here? But they just need their parent, and they need to, food and shelter and clothing and good health care. And they're smiling, and they're running, and they're playing games, and it's just, and you just look around going, I'm not sure we could do this, and and they're so sweet, and they all want to come and touch you and hug you, but we have to be careful also that we don't bring germs into their locations.
Right.
Ebola is a big issue before COVID-19, and so we had to make sure that our shoes and everything were sanitized so that we didn't introduce any type of a virus into their environment. But it's a very rewarding job.
It sounds like it. And I'm sure the United Nations has all of their inventory issues tapped up in a bow and everything is perfect. So we won't talk about that at all. We won't talk about that at all.
I think they do, as long as people do what they're supposed to do, right? So as long as there is the weighing and the scanning and all that, but there's a lot of things that that I'm sure everybody can improve upon. But those are big pallets, large amounts of food. But again, everybody has inventory.
Everybody has inventory, right?
Everybody has even places who do services, they have inventory too. But you're either selling something or you're selling a service, and this is what makes the world go round, right?
So I was leaving my full-time job to start Countalytics. My wife said, "So you're gonna leave to count inventory? That's what you're gonna do?" I was like, "Yeah. That's what we're going to do." She couldn't believe, but again, people don't realize how kind of important it is.
But you're more than in inventory. You're kind of in artificial intelligence, right? And
we are. So
that's a whole new. That's what you tell people. That's a sexy new area.
That's a sexy new area. So yeah, I mean, but you're right. So in a sense, we're really a data company, right? Yep. So and the images are just the data we use to help our clients out. So I say pictures but we are a data company. We take one form of data and turn it into another form of data, in a sense, right? And so I think the easiest way to help our clients is say nowadays, everybody has a phone, right? Everybody has a phone. Everybody has a computer in their pocket with a camera on it. And so the easiest way, and everybody's used to using mobile apps. So the easiest way for us to help our clients, I think in 3 clicks, you can take a picture, and almost immediately we can tell you what's in that image, right? And so I think that's kind of how we help. It was my goal, right, for us to continue to help our clients. As you know, we started in the airline industry, but we're moving into healthcare as well, and so we're slowly learning the healthcare and the hospital industry as well. But it's very exciting. It's very fun.
Yeah. And even food service, I think, would be another area. We talked a little and we laughed about the cups at Starbucks, but, franchisees of any fast food or service industry, even restaurants nowadays, everybody's got to-go packaging, right? Because of the virus and the need and for people to deliver and like in Rome, food delivery wasn't a thing. Not really until recently. And now, everybody has these really fancy kind of things. These are expensive items. All of this, the extra packaging that they have to provide to people, that's extremely expensive. And they're not used to having it. So they don't have systems. These aren't barcoded items. These are small mom and pop restaurants,
Yep.
So there's food service also has a need. That was another thing when I worked for Taco Bell. Although now it's mostly franchised. At the time I was there, it was like 60% company owned and 40% franchise. And so those company owned stores, inventory was a big deal, but you were going to count the meat and the cheese and the lettuce, probably, but you probably weren't going to bother with some of the other things because, it was a cost benefit issue. When is the store ever really closed to count things? I mean, there's a lot of movement in the stores. So it's a difficult thing to get your arms around. So I think there's definitely a need for, and if they could do it just by taking a phone and taking a picture of their freezer, I mean, that would be amazing. Amazing.
So one thing, another project we're working on, talking about a phone, we're actually installing for an airline that we were doing a project with. We actually have installed cameras. So the camera actually takes a picture automatically. So there's no human intervention at all. So as someone is loading that liquor tray or that food cart, They put it under the camera takes a picture, and it tells them immediately if it's right or not.
Yeah.
Right. And then they know, okay, I missed something. Let me put it in. And then at the end of the day, the company gets a detailed report. All right. Now I know what happened for the last 24 hours. And now I can go and see how accurate we are or see how inaccurate we are. Right. And so.
Remember also when we were doing, and they may have changed the process by now. Again, a lot of what I say is dated in processes that I remember we asked for them to improve. So I'm going to presume that everybody improved because, you know, they love internal audit,
right.
But remember when a long time ago, the airlines would, once they serviced, you know, the carts are very important and there's so much turnover and so many flights that they don't have a lot of time to sit there and carefully remove those bottles. And that's why most of them are plastic, by the way, is they would just take them, they dump out into this gigantic pile, what they didn't use. And then they'd start with a fresh tray that was pre-stocked, that had everything in it in the order that it was supposed to be. And this pile, who was going to go through the pile? I don't think anyone ever actually went through the pile. I think that got recycled, thrown out. I'm not sure what happened to that. That was a huge cost.
Yep.
You know, because you could have a tray that was 75% full and it's going to go. Right. And I just remember thinking, there's got to be a better way of doing this.
Yep. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's why I started the company, right? To make a better way, right? To make a better way. But you're right. But and you'd be surprised how many airlines do the same thing again. Yeah. Right. And I think the main value that we add is once a flight is over, like now you can also take a picture of those items. Yeah. Right. And now you know consumption. Now I know from Atlanta to Los Angeles, we on average use 60% of our inventory.
So let's not put 100% in there.
Exactly.
And that was the thing that we were arguing. I tended to argue a little, but asking questions saying, but wait a second, you know, you're flying, you know, Salt Lake City to Las Vegas or whatever, or maybe you're flying to Las Vegas and there's going to be more booze being served. Exactly. But if you're going, you know, Sunday morning, 6 a.m. flight, really, do you need full trays? You know, probably not. And do they come back almost, you know, empty? No. So from a weight standpoint, from a fuel standpoint, from a cost standpoint, doesn't make sense to go full. And I remember the answer back was, well, we've done time and motion studies and, you know, it's faster, easier to do it this way. I'm not sure, you know, how dated are those? How much have we really learned for them? And are you sure that but the trays come back empty? Well, where did they go? Are you sure? Where did they go?
Right.
You know, because people would see the process and say, well, that's just a waste.
Right. Yeah. And you think
they
about,
don't care. Why don't I help myself? You know?
Exactly. And you think about, as you said before, during pilots or when you have auditors, your behavior changes, right? Now I'm doing something a little different because I know somebody's watching me. Yeah. But if no one's watching, but what we've seen even in our lumberyard client is that when there's somebody going around taking pictures of the outdoor lumberyard, right? But they've seen theft reduced by like 15%.
Yeah.
Right. Things aren't missing anymore because now someone says, "Oh, David's going around taking pictures. Let me make sure I'm not caught on camera."
Sure.
With some hauling wood out of the store, right?
Sometimes internal control is just is something that is visible to somebody, and you know, and it prevents somebody who normally wouldn't be dishonest from rationalizing something. And also, again, there's waste, and you know, it's not all theft. There's waste. Yep. There's misplaced items. I remember doing inventories when I was in public accounting, and I always dreaded them because they were always on, you know, New Year's Eve, right?
Right.
But New Year's Eve or some other time I didn't necessarily want to be there. But I just remember that was a big deal. First of all, it's important to have them, and a lot of accounting rules require that you count your inventory periodically. But a lot, you know, some things are very high value. very small items, easy to slip in your pocket if you would, like if you were in a jewelry store, if you were, there's just a lot of different applications. Well, I don't know how many people are selling CDs and DVDs anymore, but now we're getting streaming and downloaded, so you've got a different imagery. But that's another area that, I remember that even at Starbucks, the CDs were a very high theft item. They were missing a lot.
Sure, yeah.
And
they're right by the cash register, or they were right by the cash register.
Yeah. I remember the sweet story of the founder having been in a restaurant, and he was watching people as they were taking something, and he was like, oh, "Stop them!" He was with somebody. He's like, "Stop them!" They're like, "What are you gonna do? Seriously, tackle the person?" It's a difficult issue.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I agree. There's so many aspects. We could talk all day. There's so many aspects of inventory and how it relates to just general business. I think you're totally right. I have one last question for you, and it doesn't really have to do with inventory at all. But as young people trying to find a way to go throughout their career, you've been at a lot of large companies, made a lot of big jumps across the country, moved to another continent. Like, what advice, I guess, would you give to other people starting out in their their career, or just think about changing careers?
Yeah, well, and that's a good question. I think the first thing I will tell people, because I know how quickly people move around in a different generation than mine. Mine had a job security kind of, we were raised by the greatest generation, right? So we were told, keep your job, have a job, keep your job. But I think if you can do something that you enjoy doing, first of all, pick the right major. Not everybody does that part well. Good to pick a major where there might be jobs in it. But if not, then do something that you care about. And if you're not happy, you need to leave. And that's the thing, is even if it's really not a long time afterward, I probably went a little bit, I worked for some amazing companies, but I wasn't happy every day. Right. And, if I had made the shift earlier, I think that I would have, been happier for a longer part of my career. And that starts to show in the work that you do. It starts to show in what you're able to accomplish. So I would say, take a chance, take a risk, put yourself out there. Attitude is everything. I would much rather work with people who are willing to try than people who just tell them, I'm sorry, I can't take on anymore. I've got too much on my plate. That's fine if it's valid. But if I'm just going to go to somebody else and give them the opportunity. So when the really great project comes by, I remember, as a person who runs large functions, I remember how many times that person turned me down when I thought it was a great opportunity for them. I just go to somebody else. Right. And so, so be eager, be willing to learn, be willing to say, look, I'm a smart person. A smart person can learn anything. And volunteer for work if you're not that busy. And that's like something that, nobody wants to volunteer to take on more, but that's how you learn, and that's how you get promoted, and that's how you move up in an organization. But the first most important thing is work isn't everything.
I agree with that.
Make sure that you're making time for the other things that matter, your family, your parents, because you'll blink and they're grown up, they've passed away. All of those times where you sat there and you said, well, I really can't do it because I've got to go to work. You need to go to every single baseball game, volleyball tournament, every orchestra, recital, everything. As a parent, you need to go to all the parent-teacher conferences. That's important to do. Or your partner, if you have a partner that has an important event, something, don't skip those things. Those people will be there at your funeral.
Yep.
Your work colleagues, maybe not,
Right.
but the people, that surround you, that's important. And I think, in a way, the COVID-19 situation is it's a terrible tragedy to a lot of people, but in a lot of ways, it's a blessing in disguise. I know just from skip level meetings with my own team that it is going to be extraordinarily difficult to get everybody back in the office.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Nobody wants to do that.
Nope.
I think there have been some surveys that I don't know if they've been published, but that some of the organizations I talk to that are in the private sector are doing, and they're getting responses like 95% of their people prefer to work from home.
Exactly.
And think they're more and probably are more productive doing so. I went to the office today. It's the first time I'm allowed to go every day because I'm on the critical, executive list or whatever. I go in, when I have board meetings, then I'm not going in for the rest of the week, and I'll go in next Monday when I have another board meeting because there's nobody there.
Right.
And so I'm driving all the way to work. I'm parking. There's no food offered because there's not enough people to bother to open the restaurant. So I'm in my office. No one else is around. All my meetings are are kind of on Teams or Zoom, or there's really no reason for me to be there. And I think everybody recognizes that. But the beauty of that is, I would say I used to think it was within 10 years, so it would be past my work life, but I don't think it will be anymore. I think within 3 to 5 years, you can hire the best and the brightest people no matter where they are, and they can live in any country, and it's okay.
Yep.
And we won't have these huge, office buildings where everybody, uses all the carbon fuel and everything and emits all the carbon dioxide and all the pollution, because people will prefer to be at home. Right. And, unfortunately, the next bubble is probably the commercial real estate market.
It's a domino effect.
Yeah, we're going to have to find alternative uses for how to turn office buildings into apartment buildings. But other than that, that's a great opportunity for young people, and because you can be with your family, you can be at home, you won't miss everything. And we have happy employees, and it's free.
And work still gets done, right? Work still gets done. I think that's
done. And employees, it's a free benefit you can give your employees. They can work from home. Doesn't cost you anymore, but may even save you something. And they're happy. You're happy. We're all happy.
I totally agree. I totally agree. As we've been forced to work from home for the last 4 or 5 months, I think. So yeah, I totally agree. You spend more time with family. Now, whether you want to spend more time with family or not is an individual choice. Right.
Anymore.
So,
but but it's great because I'll be on calls, and somebody's dog will start barking in the background or jump up on them, and it's nice to see people in their home environments. It's nice to see people more relaxed. People are getting enough sleep finally. Mm-hmm. I think it's a new world, but it's not necessarily going to be a worse world.
I totally agree with that. I think there's definitely, as many people have been affected by COVID-19, unfortunately, I think there was definitely a silver lining. Like, it's definitely a silver lining that allows you to spend more time with family.
Aren't we lucky though that this happened, now instead of 10 years ago, where we didn't have the technology. Right. And Zoom and all the calls when these web conferences first came up, it was really shaky.
Really bad. Really bad.
And this whole making phone calls over the internet, that was sketchy as well.
Yeah.
But everything's working so well now. And, but if you can imagine, you're going to have, inventory showrooms and those not showrooms, but warehouses and stuff where it's all going to become automated.
Yep, exactly.
And the whole work environment, work world is changing, and so the service that you provide and the technology that you provide is going to become, I think, a much more vital part of everybody's business day, because they're going to sadly, we're going to have to repurpose a lot of people's jobs.
Yep.
Because either we're not going to be able to get the virus under control, there's not going to be a vaccine, or people's preferences will change.
Right.
For how
exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think your preference will change. And I totally agree that you're going to have to, and with this, force for our work habits to change, I think people's behavior will change as well. And so hopefully companies will say, hey, we need to save money. We need to be more efficient. We need to be smarter about the choices we make. And that's kind of how, that's the plug. That's the hole we plug, right? We're trying to make sure that we're there for companies that need to be more efficient and more innovative.
Yeah, and we just need to find the repurposing jobs for people that are going to lose their traditional
But
job.
It's funny you say that, because even with our wood client, there was a person that his job was to count wood every day, all day, right? He would count inventory all day. And now they use the mobile app, but now he has learned, I think he is doing forklift, and because they needed a forklift operator. So they were about to hire a forklift operator. They sent him to forklift class, or I don't know what that is, and now he's doing forklift, right? So he spends a couple hours taking pictures, and the other part helping move around inventory. So it's you have to be creative, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I know that's our time, Kiko. Thank you so much for being on the latest version of Count It Up. We appreciate it.
Of course.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and we look forward to speaking soon.
Yep, absolutely. It's good talking to you as well, David. And tell everyone at home I said hi.
I will. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
take care.